We're going to use the employees multiple pivot file. A couple of extra options here that are worth noting. The first of those is what to do when there are effectively null returns. So in this little pivot table here, we click in, we can see that sometimes there are no values. For example, there are no divorced people in personnel, so there's no total salary, but the field shows as empty. What we'd quite like is for there to be a 0 in there, so effectively a 0 return for empty cells. That's simply achieved by going into the pivot table options. Then on the layout and format tab, come down to where it says for empty cells show, and we can put a 0. And then OK. We see that we then get zeros in the empty cells. They're being displayed as hyphens because the formatting chosen is accounting. If we change that from here to currency rather than accounting, then we'll actually see zeros rather than the little hyphen. So that was just a notion of formatting. Two other clever little options we can add to our pivot tables is our own manual grouping. If we take this particular table, for example, where we have personnel, sales, warehousing, accounts, clerical, finance, and operations, which is our departments, and what we'd like to do is group some of them physically together. So I'd like to take the first 3 there and create a group from them, and I can simply select those 3 values. Up on the pivot table tools ribbon, there is a group option, and I can choose group selection, and that becomes group 1, that if I then compress, we see that it does the little subtotaling, as it would do on normal grouping within the data. But this is not using the data itself to create those groups, it's by doing it manually. And what you'll notice is that although we've grouped 3 of them and they become group 1, personnel, sales and warehousing, the other departments have now become their own groups. So we have accounts as an accounts group, clerical as a clerical group, finance as a finance group. That's not quite what I'm trying to achieve. So let's multiple select accounts, clerical and finance. So that's control click on each of those to avoid the headings. And let's add those as a group and they become group 2. So we take operations and blank. Let's control click on both of those. Group selection creates me group 3. Now if I want to give them a much more sensible label than group 1, group 2 and group 3, I simply click on the particular cell and let's edit the value in the formula bar. So these are going to be the office set. These are going to be the workers. And these can be the others. So that's the ability to add manual grouping to your pivot tables. And the last little option I'd like to show you, which is very useful and extremely exciting, but we'll create ourselves a new pivot table in order to do that. So let's go back to the employees, insert pivot table. Now at the moment to create this pivot table, we have to take the fields that we require and drag them into the correct section over here on our pivot table fields manager effectively. Now in the old days, if I take this back, you could actually take your field and drag and drop it into the correct section over here. Now you can still do that with current pivot tables by going to pivot table options, then to the display tab and placing a tick in the classic pivot table layout. Okay, and you'll see we now have the 4 sections. The row fields here, value fields go here, column fields go here, and report filter or page filter options go here. So now I can actually drag my fields from the list and drop them in the correct area that I wish to see them in. This is called the classic layout, basically because it's the old-fashioned way. Drop the sex into there, and then we can take our salary and drag that into the middle, so the value fields. And we'll see that it's gone for count rather than sum. So we need to visit the settings and change that from count to sum. And we now have count of salary, split up by male and female as column headings and then towns as row headings. So that's just the ability to drag them in to the actual pivot table layout as opposed to using the bottom section here. And it's simply a tick in the options to enable classic pivot table layout. If it's not a layout that you like, you can turn that off and leave that off effectively because by default it's not on, and just drag your values and fields into the correct section here. So it's the same 4 sections, the rows, the columns, the central section for the values, and then the page filters. And that's the same 4 areas here: data, the columns, the rows, and the report and page filter options at the top. So those are a few extra options for your pivot tables: the ability to show zeros when there's null value, the customized grouping if it makes logical sense to you, and then activating the classic layout so you can drag and drop between each of the sections.